The prophet Micah lived in the 8th century BCE in the kingdom of Judah. It was a time of immense unrest, fear, and uncertainty. If you had taken a poll of those who lived in Judah at the time, they might have said it was exhausting, chaotic, deceptive. Micah probably would have said it was predictable. The Assyrian Empire was looming threateningly to the north. The religious and political leaders of Judah had rejected the cause of the poor and embraced the call of power. And so as the rich got richer and the poor got poorer and the oppression of Micah's people deepened and became more entrenched, Micah sought to call his people back to the ways of God. Not pietistic worship offered with extravagance, but justice and kindness and a humble walk with God. Micah knew that the clock was ticking for Judah. It was Kairos time. So what is Kairos time? In her book, Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God, the Black theologian Kelly Brown Douglas explains it like this. Kairos time is a decisive moment in history that potentially has far-reaching impact. It is often a chaotic period, a time of crisis. However, it is through the chaos and the crisis that God is fully present, disrupting things as they are and providing an opening to a new future, to God's future. Kairos time is pregnant with infinite possibilities for new life. Kairos time is God's time. It is a time bursting forth with God's call to a new way of living in the world. It is God calling us to a new relationship with our very history and sense of self, and thus to a new relationship with one another, and even with God. As chaotic and crisis-filled as our times are, I believe that we, like Micah, are living in Kairos time. And so, amidst the exhaustion and the chaos and the deception and the suffering and the fear and the uncertainty of it all, I believe that God is at work right now, inviting us to respond to God's call and embody a new way of living in the world. And if it is true that we are living in Kairos time, then the question before us today is the same one that was before Micah in his time. With what shall we come before the Lord? What is required of us in Kairos time? And Micah is not the only one with an answer. From the moment Black folks arrived on the shores of the Americas, Black Christians and Black Christian theology have left behind blueprints for how God's people must live in Kairos time. And few have done so more publicly and profoundly than the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In April of 1968, for example, King was speaking to a packed house at the Church of God in Christ headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee. It was the thick of Jim Crow, a Kairos time if we have ever seen one. And King was in Memphis to support Black sanitation workers who were on strike in the city. He had spent the last 13 years of his life fighting for civil rights for Black Americans across the American South. And what King did not know was that his fight would soon come to an end, because he was killed the next day. Before King was the civil rights leader that we remember him for, he was a pastor. In fact, King never stopped being a pastor. And the civil rights movement, for that matter, was a movement led by the Black church. It was people of faith, Black people of faith, who were at the vanguard of the struggle for God's future to come to life. Now, on paper, that night in April of 1968 was a rally. But in spirit, it was church. And his speech that night became a kind of sermon as he invited the crowd to, in his words, develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. So let's take a moment to listen to what King has to say.
Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. One day a man came to Jesus, and he wanted to raise some questions about some vital matters of life. At points he wanted to trick Jesus. That's right. And show him that he knew a little more than Jesus knew and throw him off base. Now that question could have easily ended up in a philosophical and theological debate. But Jesus immediately pulled that question from midair and placed it on the dangerous curve between Jerusalem and Jericho. And he talked about a certain man who fell among thieves. You remember that a Levite, and the priest passed by on the other side, they didn't stop to help him. And finally, a man of another race came by. He got down from his beast, decided not to be compassionate by proxy, but he got down with him, administered first aid, and helped the man in need. Jesus ended up saying this was the good man, this was the great man, because he had the capacity to project the I into the thou and to be concerned about his brother. Now, you know, we use our imagination a great deal to try to determine why the priest and the Levite didn't stop. The times we say they were busy going to a church meeting, an ecclesiastical gathering, and they had to get on down to Jerusalem so they wouldn't be late for their meeting. At other times, we would speculate that there was a religious law that one who was engaged in religious ceremonials was not to touch a human body 24 hours before the ceremony. And every now and then we began to wonder whether maybe they were not going down to Jerusalem, down to Jericho rather, to organize a Jericho Road Improvement Association. That's a possibility. Maybe they felt that it was better to deal with the problem from the causal root rather than to get bogged down with an individual effect. But I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me. It's possible that those men were afraid. You see, the Jericho Road is a dangerous road. That's right, that's right. I remember when Mrs. King and I were first in Jerusalem. We rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as we got on that road, I said to my wife, I can see why Jesus used this as the setting for his parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's really conducive for ambushing. You start out in Jerusalem, which is about 1,200 miles, or rather 1,200 feet above sea level. And by the time you get down to Jericho, 15 or 20 minutes later, you're about 2,200 feet below sea level. That's a dangerous road. In the days of Jesus, it came to be known as the bloody paths. You know, it's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt that the man on the ground was merely faking. And he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them over there, lure them there for quick and easy seizure. And so the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him?
If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? The king's lesson in dangerous unselfishness is a powerful one. It's one that I've been sitting with a lot in this Kairos time. But it's not the only lesson Black theology has offered for times such as these. And so today, for the rest of our time, I want to invite you to engage with some of those lessons from some of my favorite Black theologians. So underneath each of your seats, you will find a handout. Now, each of the 3 columns that you're sitting in have a different set of handouts. So there's 3 different versions of this handout. But each one has 2 quotes from 2 of my favorite Black theologians. And what I'd like to invite you to do is to turn to the people you're sitting with and read this handout together. Actually, read it out loud together. And then take a few minutes as a group to read what you've read. And while you do that, I want you to ask yourself this question. What do these Black theologians have to say about what is required of us during Kairos time? And that question is going to be our responding question for today. So after you and the people you're sitting with read the handout aloud, talk about it together, and then invite you to write down your responses to that question on a Post-it note, take it to the back of the chapel, and pin it to the bulletin board that you see in front of the tree. And those Post-its will get moved into the lounge so that we can continue reflecting on these lessons and learnings throughout the week. Friends, let's read, learn, and respond.